Hello, 7th grade. Today we're going to be talking about different angle relationships, so how angles relate to each other, or how we can compare different angles. And to do that, we have to know something about the angle, or we have to kind of have a setup for how the angles work. And the first setup we're going to look at is going to be an intersection. And I know when you hear the word intersection, you probably think streets. And that's basically what an intersection is. If we have a street going this way and a street going that way, right where they intersect is the intersection, and we use the exact same word when we're talking about lines. So if I got one line going this way here and one line going this way here, in the middle where they meet is going to be my intersection. So looking at this, I have 4 different angles, one here, 2, 3, and 4. It doesn't really matter what order we put them in. You could actually label them A, B, C, and D. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to leave them as A, B, C, and D when I'm talking about them. So there's 2 kinds of relationships here that we would deal with when we're talking about these intersections. And the first one is going to be an adjacent angle. And what adjacent means is going to be a neighboring angle. So an adjacent angle is going to be a neighboring angle. And if we look for some examples of this, D and C are going to be neighbors. B and C are going to be neighbors, A and B are neighbors, and A and D are neighbors. So we can say that all of those are going to be adjacent angles. A and D, A and B, B and C and D. All of those are going to be our adjacent angles. The next set we have is going to be opposite angles. And this is kind of self-explanatory. Opposite angles are angles that are across from each other. They're across. And if we look here, some examples of the opposite angles would be B and D, going straight across, or A and C, going straight across. So you have BD, and we have A and C, and those are going to be our opposite angles. And just a couple things we can say about opposite angles, if I draw a couple more of these intersections, is that these opposite angles, if this one's small, that one's also small. If this one's big, that one's also big. As it turns out, these opposite angles are always going to be equal to each other. Or as we say when we're talking about geometry, we say that they are congruent. So these are always going to be congruent or equal. And the official word when we're talking about geometry is still congruent, so that's the one you're going to see more often. But when you see that, just think equal. The angles are equal to each other. Adjacent angles are a little bit trickier. So if I draw another intersection right here for us to look at, and we're thinking about this angle here and that angle right there. They're definitely not equal to each other. I can draw a intersection like this and make that very obvious that this angle is different from that one. So we can't say that they're equal to each other, but I'd still like to have something to say about them. And what we can say is that since this is a straight line, if we add up these 2 angles, they have to add up to a straight angle, this straight angle right here, which is going to be 180 degrees. So these add to 180 degrees. So just looking at this one more time, adjacent angles we know are going to add to 180, and opposite angles are going to be equal to each other. So that means that B equals D and A equals C. And there's a lot of interesting things we can do by that, which means if I have a quick example, I draw this and I have know that this is 30 degrees right here. I somehow find out that that one angle is 30 degrees. Because it's opposite of this angle, I know that this angle has to be equal to it, so it's also going to be 30 degrees. And then I know that these 2 have to add up to 180. So 30 plus what is 180 should get me 150 degrees right here. And same thing happens here, gets me 150 degrees. And if we notice, just doing that also gets me that these are equal to each other just like they should be because they are opposite angles. So I'll give you guys one more of these. I'll give you one angle measurement, 45 degrees right here. And if you'd like to work out the other 3 angles, that'd be absolutely great practice. I'll just keep on going. There's one more kind of setup we need to look at for some definitions for angles, and that's going to be for parallel lines. So if we have parallel lines, and I'll draw two parallel lines right here, and to get angles we need to have a line that crosses it. So this is going to be my example right here. And if we look, we now have 8 different angles to work with. And I'll label them as letters again because I find letters are easier to work with. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. That is a lot of angles. Some words that we use to describe these are going to be exterior and interior. So exterior just means on the outside. So A, B, G, and H are all going to be exterior angles, whereas interior, let me pick a different color for this. Here we go. Interior is going to mean inside. So inside these parallel lines are going to be the F, D, C, and E, and those are going to be my interior angles. We've got a couple other ones that we can describe. So one example is going to be corresponding angles. Let's use this color. Corresponding angles. And corresponding angles are ones that are essentially the same as each other, just at different intersections. And I know that sounds weird, but as an example, this A is the top left angle, so it would correspond to the top left angle of this intersection here, which would be E. Another example would be that D here is the bottom right, so it would correspond to H, which is the other bottom right. So it means that they're at the same spot on the intersection. And these are also going to be congruent, which one more time means equal. All right, let's keep going. Some other ones we have would be alternate angles. And for the alternate angle, all that means is that we're going to flip. I'm going to get a different color so I can show you guys what this looks like on my example. An alternate angle is one where we can flip over the intersecting line, or the not parallel line. And that sounds kind of strange. I'll show you what it means. It's not actually that hard. So it flips over the non-parallel line. So the alternate angle, E right here, it's alternate. We would flip over the non-parallel line, which would be this one right here. So flipping over it would get me to F, and that would be the alternate angle. And D and C would also be alternate angles. All right, so if we draw this again with my parallel lines, there's a lot of things we can say about this setup. So I'm going to have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. So we know that our opposite angles are going to be equal to each other. So let's just start with A. And I know A is going to be equal to D. I also know that it's going to be equal to its corresponding angle, and A's corresponding angle is going to be E, so A is equal to E. And I know E is equal to its opposite angle, which is H. So E equals H, and A equals H. So what that means is all 4 of these angles are going to be the same. And I can do the exact same thing with the other ones. So B, C, F, and G are also going to be the same. So whenever you have a problem like this, you know that this set of angles, my yellow angles, are all going to be equal to each other. So I can write that as B equals C equals F equals G. And I know that all my green angles are going to be equal to each other. So I can say A equals D equals E equals H. And then the other thing I know is that these two are going to be add up to 180 degrees. So I know that my adjacent angles add to 180 degrees. So looking at that, what that means is if I take any of these yellow angles and any of the green angles and add them together, so B plus D, for example, has to equal 180 degrees. And looking up here, that makes sense because these added together have to make that full straight angle one more time, which we know is 180 degrees. So what the practice here is going to be is basically going to be recognizing some of these vocab words. So it'll give you a set of angles and say find some adjacent angles or find some opposite angles. And from there, using the vocab and our knowledge of this kind of relationships to find angles that are equal to each other and to find angles that we don't know the values of. So please make sure we do the practice set in addition to taking notes on this video. Bring that into class tomorrow and we'll be good to go. I'll see y'all in class.